So what should we do for an intro this time? And then Tettle's just yelling, and we're here with episode 2.
All right, and we're back with episode 2, Delve Hour, as a main topic today, as Growl could not get enough of delves. And welcome back to the bench, powered by Wowhead. Shout out to the hosts. Hello, Squishei. How have you been? You're in a new location this week.
Yeah, I'm visiting Boston this week, so I'm on the go, and I'm holding a microphone, just like some guy. I don't know.
Reporter Squishei bringing us the news live from Boston, the headquarters of all things War Within.
John Wowhead himself reporting live from Boston, and Growl from his underground armory bunker, gonna show us off his shields, maybe.
Yeah, I'm saving up all my gear. I'm getting ready. There's going to be a major item shortage in M+, so I'm hoarding. I'm in here building my armor and my shields, getting ready. We'll talk about that later.
All right, so big ups to all the viewers. I think that we've had a ton of positive feedback on the first episode, so big shout out to you guys for watching. Thank you guys so much. We do really appreciate it. That's about the general vibe that we're going to be going for each and every single week. So without further ado, Growl, what topics do we have for today?
Yo, also shout out to everybody for the questions. If you guys have stuff that you want us to talk about on stream, leave those on Twitter, tweet at us. Questions for today. We got some tank tuning and some other tuning. Are tanks strong enough yet? We'll bring in our guest, Yoda, resident tank expert. Aug Evokers, they've been nerfed. Are they nerfed enough yet? Mythic rating, gear sucks. Is Mythic rating mandatory enough yet? Blizzard's 4th Affix, Devour what? Are they fun enough yet? And delves, will I shut up about them yet? No. So in the first topic, we have a giant blue post. Actually, it's not that giant, but absolutely hilarious delve blue post. Apparently, there is a bug where players have not been able to leave delves. Blizzard has trapped the population in delves on the beta. Apparently, Bran is holding them hostage in the Nerubian cocoons. We have breaking news that Blizzard is hopefully intending to fix this bug by the time things are released. How's it looking out there, out on the dev fields in Boston, Squishei?
Well, thank you very much, Growl. Things are pretty rough here in Boston for delve lovers, especially those for healers. Bran is going to become more useful for those healers. Growl, are you going to be doing a lot of delves there as a healer spec?
You know, one of the things that I complain the most about delves is that they're not role specific enough. You know, when I play a healer and I do content in WoW, I want to heal. I want to do healer stuff, and I kind of hate when I have to walk around and just be a really scuffed DPS. So it is a little bit refreshing to see basically that what they talk about a little bit aside from the bug fixes is they're improving Bran's DPS and making it so players with a healer spec are sort of like their Bran is buffed more, and hopefully it'll be more of like even though you're solo, it feels like it's you and a bud and you're mostly just healing and responsible with keeping alive. So although I've been a little bit down on delves lately, I think seeing stuff like this makes me feel better when they're adding more sort of like role specific things. So I like how they mentioned they want Bran to feel more impactful for healers, and they want things to be every single class has a good experience in delves. They don't want it to be like, oh, if you're a Havoc Demon Hunter, everything's great for you, and if you're a Holy Priest, it's just like the most boring thing ever and you don't set foot into it. So I mean, although they didn't say much like concrete changes, I am optimistic about this.
All right, so you buy the dip on delves.
Yeah, oh yeah, we're buying the dip on delves. No, we're not. We're short. We're short delves. We're riding it to zero. Let's be honest. Grawl's stock tip of the day: short delves. Just short them all the way down. It's a bear market.
All right, delve hour over. I think that's enough delve conversation.
That's enough delves for today.
All right, so other things, we got a pretty decent amount of like class tuning just in general. So they buffed and nerfed classes across the board. I think that they are buffing tank damage just straight across the board. And the other major difference is that they're actually nerfing Augmentation Evoker. I think that Blizzard also, with this massive amount of class tuning, it seems like they're still trying to get hero talents in line with one another. That was one of the things I think that they were aiming to address with this tuning. Otherwise, things like Frost Death Knight buffs just don't make any sense whatsoever. But I think that this is like the start of them trying to go in the right direction, where we were kind of talking about it last week, where classes just aren't exactly that close to balanced yet.
Yeah, you can go ahead, Squishy. Well, how about let's go through each role. So I know Squishy, you mostly play tank. Do you want to go over like some of the tank changes? I see like pretty radical damage buffs across the board. Like even the even the better tanks are seeing like 10 to 15%, and then I'm seeing crazy stuff like Prot Warrior like 30%. How have you felt those have gone?
Yeah. So first of all, I was a tank. I'm now playing Dragon, likely Aug.
Wizard. Oh
Aug
my
Prison.
gosh.
So, but basically I've been keeping up with it. Tanks were just doing really low damage. Which was kind of why I think a lot of the negative sentiment to the tank changes that we're going to be talking about when they nerf their survivability, they're not self-sufficient. They don't do damage. So what's the point of playing a tank? And I think a lot of tanks, have felt in the past that they don't really get as much attention as DPS specs. And we're not expecting much to come from this. But the fact that they are addressing, a lot of these tank specs to do better damage is kind of nice. It is kind of a nice change to see, so that tanks feel like they're actually contributing something to the raid other than just surviving now.
Dude, 30% for High Warrior. Oh my god.
Yeah, it's definitely a lot. And it'll also help with threat.
I will say anecdotally, tanks do a lot of damage in Mythic Plus. I suspect that Growl probably feels very similar, where some of the tank specs, and this isn't true for all of them, but things like, dude, Vengeance Demon Hunter with Doom Sigil and one of their hero talents just did an insane amount of damage. There's like a couple of tanks that their AoE damage is really high, so then whenever they're getting flat aura buffs, it makes me question as to like what's going to be going on. Because like, was their single target damage really that bad, Squishy?
I don't fully recall, but from raid testing, I definitely believe it was quite on the low side.
Okay.
So I want to say yes, but I also think that DH has some hero talent balancing issues, if I recall correctly, where one is just super highly tuned.
So Venge plays Felscarred. That's where like all of their damage comes from, is like Demon Surge and like Doom Sigil.
Okay, fair enough. I'm not too familiar with Vengeance, but yeah, just from the raid testing that I remember, tank damage was quite low.
Yeah.
Growl, healers then?
I think, this is both healers and tanks, but one thing I think that's important is talking about the talent trees, in the sense that healers and tanks especially, they have this choice of whether they want, like, how much damage do they want to do, right? As a DPS, you sort of just go down the line and pick the things that you think will do the highest damage. But as a tank, you sort of have to walk this line between how much do I want to be surviving, how much damage do I want to be dealing. And I think when you have that choice, especially with survivability kind of coming into question now and self-sustain, when you choose to be a little bit squishier to deal a lot of damage, I feel like you want to feel the impact of that when you're in a key. Like if tanks are doing like dog water damage, it feels bad to take these talents, right? Sort of like I feel as a healer, when I take damage talents and then I'm doing 0 damage anyway, it's like, why do I even take these? But I feel like it's important that tanks do a significant amount of damage so that when they take these talents that, oh, this raises my damage by 10% or 15%, it's actually like, okay, like this is worth it. Yeah, I'm losing a little bit of survivability. It's a little bit harder for me to self-sustain. I have to rely on my healer, but like, man, I feel it. I'm really like blasting right now. I don't know if you guys feel the same way.
It's so interesting because I see some healers, and I obviously not all healers feel this way, but I do see some healers sometimes would be like, I want to go back to the olden days where I'm not having to DPS as a healer. I don't have to do all these jobs. I'm just there to heal. Whereas I feel like for tanks like want this like hybrid role. They want Vengeance to come back, like the Mist of Pandaria mechanic, where they're due to the more damage that they take, they deal more damage. They actually want to feel like their contribution level is really high. Inside of not only dungeons but like inside of raid, they actually want to feel like the buttons that they're pressing matter and the things that they're doing matters. And like you were saying, there being a trade-off between how much damage can you do versus like what survivability are you giving up actually is a pretty key takeaway for like tank players, because sometimes you're going to have to take a survivability loss if there's a damage node that's going to increase your damage by 30%. Like you're just going to have to learn how to play with the node.
I think you'll find a variation on how much people like a tank wants to survive versus how much it wants to do damage. You're going to have variations of that from player to player. The one thing that I think most tanks don't want to deal with is threat. I think most tanks do not want to deal with threat whatsoever and wish it was gone. But like having to choose between damage and survivability is absolutely something that like Growl said is kind of an interesting decision to me, and I think a lot of people as well.
Okay, can either of you guys give me like a straight up answer for this? Has anybody ever thought that like threat is a good mechanic outside of Blizzard headquarters? Like, is there anybody who's outside of Blizzard HQ that goes, you know what? I actually do think that threat is a well-designed mechanic, and I'm really thankful that it's in the game. Like, how does this even happen? Why are they so hell set on keeping it?
Well, all right. So this is going to be a new section. We're going to call it Growl's Tangent of the Day. So with regards to threat, here's the thing, especially when it comes to when it comes to raid, I would say on a single target when you have access to taunt, for the most part, threat is never a problem until we're talking about like either crazy imbalances or like, you know, big packs of mobs that spawn. The issue is with M+, especially with how good people are getting, something has to stop you, right? Like the higher end groups are going to hold W and they're going to keep going in the dungeon until they're stopped. And the problem is anything that stops you is going to feel bad. And so we see every season something ends up stopping you and then everyone complains about it and it feels bad. So for instance, like threat is one thing that stops you. Specifically, it stops you from kiting, right? So for example, if a tank can kite, well, it can just pull 4 packs at the same time and run around in a circle. And so you had, this was like sort of like BFA, where you have things like threat issues and you have things like fervent strikes that stop people from running around in circles, right? So people stopped doing that. Then in Shadowlands, we started to see the era of kicks, of every single pack just has these mobs, they would recast, they would be casters, and it was like in Shadowlands, everyone was like, oh no, there's all these kicks, there's all this crazy stuff. And then in Dragonflight, they sort of, now we're sort of entering this era of like AoE damage, where it's like every single mob does this like pulsing AoE, and if you try and pull 2 packs, you get, like for instance, Mists of Tyrannosaurus Scythe is a perfect example, where now just mobs randomly do this crazy unavoidable damage. And now everyone's like, oh no, healing is the worst it's ever been, healing is impossible, I hate relying on my healers. The problem is like, Blizzard kind of feels the need to control your dungeon experience in some manner, and they do have to stop you, and it's gonna feel bad in some way. So while I agree, like, threat feels terrible, and if you're in the pack as a tank and you're hitting your DPS buttons and you lose threat, that's terrible. But I do think that threat has to exist or else tanks will just run around forever, right? Like if tanks never have to worry about threat, then they can just run around in circles and do whatever they want. So
I will say the argument isn't normally like, oh yeah, dude, this Vengeance Demon Hunter is opening up with I-Beam while I'm just like tagging a pack with Moonfire. I don't think that anybody in their right mind thinks that Demon Hunter probably shouldn't get meleeed and die. It's more just like these Fury Warriors or these Rep Paladins, while the tank is actively hitting the pack, are ripping threat on the entire pack 10 or 15 seconds into the pull. And that I think to me is like the downside of threat. Like I feel like that's something that whenever people talk about issues with threat, I think that those are the issues that they're talking about, and then Blizzard is just like, no, we actually think that threat's in a fine spot.
Yeah, I definitely agree. I think that's a problem. I also think certain classes have problems, just the way they're built. Stuff like Rep Paladin and Dev Evoker that are built to do upfront damage. Like almost, you know, maybe give them some sort of like fade mechanic where it allows them to sort of like do what they need to do to make their class work. And then as long as they're doing their fade correctly, then they can live. I don't know. I don't really, I agree with you that there's like what I'm saying is not including everything that happened. Like there are definitely problems where threat is just not working properly or not tuned properly and it feels terrible. So I don't mean to say like, oh yeah, I love threat. Threat is great. But I think people need to keep in mind that there's almost always going to be something in the meta that feels terrible that stops you and holds you back, right? Or else you'll get to a world where everyone pulls 4 packs with the boss and then that's the whole dungeon, right?
Squishei, you're muted.
Whoops. I think that there's multiple states of threat. Like the current one they're in where things are relatively balanced is a good state to be in. And the worst state is when, like Growl and Tuttle said, you're losing threat when you're pressing your rotation. And there's like kind of a middle state as well where threat is kind of an issue, where it's kind of an annoyance, but it's doable. But I think like a world with no threat would cause some significant issues as well, where things just auto stick on the tank. Like that, I don't think is better than what we currently have. So it's definitely not fun when you rip threat and stuff like that. But I do think it's better than a world with no threat. And it seems like they are doing things to address it, you know? Like, Dev Evoker has a built-in threat reduction now for the War Within. It was on an early beta patch note. I probably think most people forgot about it, but they are looking at those kinds of things and clearly doing things to address them. I remember at one point as well, they did threat reduction mechanics. Most people probably don't remember. There was a mob in Freehold that every time it did a mechanic to your tank, it would drop threat on your tank.
Oh, that guy was a menace. The enforcer, whenever they threw your tank, would drop threat. That was a dumb.
Correct.
That was a dumb mob.
And, you know, they had the brilliant idea of putting 2 of them in a pack when your tank only has 1 taunt. So it's clear that they tried things. They don't work out. They didn't do them again, which is great. And I think it's just keeping an eye on it, making sure that it doesn't get crazy. That's what they're doing. And so far, like, no complaints for now. But when it's an issue, then they better address it again.
Yeah, 100%. Anyway, that's enough derailing of the podcast from my responsibility. I'll leave the rest of it for Tettles. To go back to the balance talk, though, with regards to healers, they've also done pretty significant tuning to each healer, very similar to the tank tuning in that I'm seeing just a lot of damage buffs across the board. Resto Druid...
Unless you're a Resto Druid?
Yeah, Resto Druid did have very good damage already, and they actually saw some nerfs. But pretty much every other healer we're seeing, not just like little buffs, but just like the tanks, like pretty significant 10, 15, 20% buffs. I do feel like that's sort of because not all the hero talents, the sort of like what Tettles mentioned, they're trying to bring the hero talents in line. And while DPS players got a big batch of hero talents that help their damage, healers might have not, they might have gotten a whole set of hero talents that do nothing for their damage. And so in turn, I think they need a little bit of buff, at least to feel relevant. Also, they are fixing some priest stuff. They're buffing some priest stuff. They nerfed Resto Shaman, which I would say is currently the leader in terms of just like putting out a lot of throughput. And I think in general, the tuning that they did was very, very good. I thought they brought the top damage and the top healers down just a peg, and they brought everyone else up. I actually, from looking at what people are doing on beta, it's a little hard to tell right now, but I'm more optimistic about the healer balance. I think a lot of people are talking about balances all over the place. The game's coming out soon. What's going on? While I'm not talking specifically about raid HPS numbers, because that's kind of its own project. When it comes to self-sustaining, like solo Mythic Plus healing, I actually think healers are in a pretty good spot right now. I think some healers are a little weak, some are a little strong, but in terms of like, if you're worried about your class being dead on arrival in War Within, I really wouldn't be. I think there's a lot of pros and cons for bringing each healer, and I'm actually like pretty happy with this whole balance patch in general, what they have.
Yeah, I think for DPS, dude, they're still making like pretty large swings, and I feel like every single patch, it's like a new DPS is OP. Like this time they nerfed Elemental Shaman. I think the numbers that I read was about 22 to 24% damage nerf on Ellie. And then they did this thing where they just overbuffed the hell out of Destro Warlock, trying to get Diabolus to a spot where it was completely playable. But now Destro's Rain of Firing single target and doing a bunch of degenerate stuff, and they're doing the highest DPS by like
they did just fix that. They did just fix that.
Like within the the last 10 minutes? Like, hold on.
Like last hour. It was hotfixed out of the beta like an hour ago.
Okay, so it was a thing, but okay. Anyways, my point stands. there's still large swings in terms of class tuning.
Yes,
we got Squishei out on the field for this, you guys. He's out there in the trenches.
Insane reporting.
As they happen.
All right,
reporting live from Boston.
Yeah, my God. Anyhow, but yeah, like I think that this is one of those things that season 1 of Dragonflight tuning for DPS was really solid. Right now, it seems like there's a lot of potential specs, at least for M+, that can be fairly solid. Raid's a little bit different. Raid is kind of weird in the sense of, to be honest, raid balance doesn't matter whenever everybody has a raid buff, so you're going to have to bring one of everything anyways. The other notable thing is that they got Aug Evoker nerfed this week, which some people, I think, vastly overstated the demise of the Augmentation Evoker.
That's a hot topic. Everyone's been wondering about this because basically, while any class you can sort of say like, oh, you can point to tons of different eras where a class has been total crap. Aug Evoker, basically, since it's come out, has been 2 in every raid group and in every M+ meta comp since it's came out. And I think people are starting to wonder, like, because of the archetype of the class, like, where will Aug be like, is it just gonna be this now where every single group wins it? I mean, I think people are saying somewhere in the neighborhood of like these were 6% nerfs or something. I don't know.
Yeah.
Tettle's probably know. You probably know better than you want to talk about how severe the Aug changes are.
So the closest clutch mates was like 10% Ebonmite, and then Ebonmite got nerfed by a little bit, so it ended up being about like a 30% damage nerf to Ebonmite. But dude, Aug Evoker was one of your. It was actually contributing a decent amount of damage in M+ anyways, to the point where it's your second DPS in a lot of runs. Like it was one of those spots where like their damage was like fairly solid. So a 6% nerf isn't even that big of a deal.
Yeah, they said in an interview that the goal of Aug this expansion was to do less on the buffing, more direct damage. So while this probably was a bigger nerf in Dragonflight, this is less of a nerf now because Aug Evoker is just doing more upfront damage as well, especially in Mythic Plus. I think that they don't know how to balance Aug though. You can call this also technically a tank survivability nerf in Mythic Plus.
I mean, you could. Would you? I guess is the question. It's one of those things that I think that I wish they would actually add more support roles. I think that the support role is like really cool, and I think that they would have done a better job if they just added more of them. But I think that as it currently stands, augmentation. I think that players just want blood. Like they want the spec just erased from the metagame and just like never see it in M+ ever again. But like right now, it's in a weird spot where tanks are struggling to live without it, and healers are struggling to heal without it in 5-man content. And so then it's one of those things that like if it's close, it's pretty good.
Yeah, it's depressing because like we'll be doing keys on the beta, and we're playing with our good friend Terrathal, who's an Aug main but plays many other classes, and we'll wipe to a boss twice, and then we're all just kind of sitting there in the spawn, and then Terrathal will just depressingly say in voice, "All right, guys, I guess I'll go Aug for the next one." And in our head, we're just me and Dorky are just like, yes, but it's just it feels bad, it feels bad, and it's like one of those things where I'm gonna try and play devil's advocate here for a little bit. So we're doing higher end keys. I mean, basically on the beta right now, we're doing 12s in the equivalent of what would be like mid to end week 1 gear, like heroic, like low heroic pieces, basically stuff that 99% of the people probably won't be doing. If you're somebody who's, I would say, a Mythic Plus enthusiast, but maybe not quite title range, do you even think Aug is good in those groups? Like, where would we would say Aug is mandatory? Do you think, let's say you're someone who's, you cap out on 12s to 15s. Would you rather invite an Aug or a Rep Paladin or like, a random easy DPS?
So I think you asked about 2 separate levels. If I'm like a low title level player, I probably want an Augmentation Evoker. I think that just the utility that they provide and the things that they're doing for your group can be good if put in the right player's hands. I think it is a spec with like a pretty high ceiling, to where I think that it's like it really can do a lot for your group, and it will help your tank a lot. If I'm just pugging an LFG, first off, I can't tell if the Aug is worth a shit because like I'm looking at the meter. I can't tell if he's good or bad. Secondly, it's one of those things that like you in like a lower level key, I just want the highest DPS comp to just kind of steamroll the dungeon, right? I want the comp that can kill the bosses the fastest. I want the comp that can kill the trash the fastest. Aug is not going to be doing that. Now Aug is doing 90% of the damage of like a top tier DPS right now, so it is contributing a little bit more than it has in the past. But I don't think that I would be inviting them if I'm trying to do like you're saying like a 10 or something like that.
Yeah, I don't pug often, but based on what I've heard, I mean, even in low title keys, there are a lot of not great Aug Evokers. I mean, the whole point of Aug Evoker is to not like obviously do damage, but to use the utility to help your group survive, using Rescue Shield, using Zephyr, using Renewing Blaze to help, using your self healing, cauterizing wounds to clear the bleeds and other debuffs. It's a very utility based spec, but a lot of Aug Evokers who are rerolling because it's mandatory don't do that. They think that Aug is just good because, I don't know, it's easy or any number of things, or just because it's meta. And that's not the reason that it's meta. It does decent or good damage depending on the season, plus more. And if you don't do the more, then there's no guarantee that there's even reason to bring an Aug.
Good Augs also will like shot call your entire key, and plus as well. Like high level Aug players will literally just like that is the role that you want to put somebody on to shot call, like a 5-man dungeon.
Yeah, I think. Well, I guess the point that I wanted to get at is that especially with how competitive high-end keys are, and sort of what I mentioned earlier about things that gate you from going out, like pulling bigger and doing more. I think it may be the case that, unfortunately, if Aug, unless Aug is total crap, right? Like, see, this what I'm sort of getting at is like Aug for the average player, like not even just average, right? Like 99% of players. Keep in mind, title range is 0.1%, right? Now, granted, not everybody plays Mythic Plus, but let's say like, average Mythic Plus enjoyer doing 10s to 12s to 13s. Aug's like probably just middle of the pack, right? And so if Aug is completely mandatory for a world first key, but completely middle of the pack for like an average thing, unless it gets a massive rework, like in order for Aug not to be brought in world first keys, they either need to change the way that world first keys are limited, or Aug needs to be just absolute dumpster tier. And at this point, I think people just hate Aug enough that they would just say, "Yep, perfect, dumpster
delete
tier."
them. Yes,
delete Aug, right? But I think keep it in mind that I would say maybe lessen the hate a little bit on Aug, especially because like I don't even think they're really that good for most people. And like, look, if you're trying to pug keys and people are like demanding Aug in a +11, like they're just kind of a moron, right? Like breaking news, random guy doing an 11 is a moron, right? Like I just think that Aug is at the point now where I almost think that you have to shift the focus way more towards like how keys are limited and what world first keys are like, rather than Aug. Because I think if Aug is literally middle of the pack for an average player, I don't see how you can be like, oh, Aug is busted. Maybe if you're a world first key doer or whatever, you can complain. But I think for most people, like, I don't know, ease the hate on Aug a little bit. I feel like I don't know what Blizzard could do other than literally deleting the class or like changing the archetype severely.
There are two different problems with Aug, depending if you're talking about Raid or Mythic Plus. Like, Mythic Plus, I think a lot of casual players just like the playstyle. Buffing your friends, buffing your party, making them more powerful, and getting your support through that way. I think a lot of people do enjoy that. I know quite a few people that do enjoy that playstyle, and I kind of enjoy that playstyle too. And it just kind of falls in that same imbalance that Blizzard talked about in the Affix post, where the things that the majority of the player want don't align with what the top 0.1% want. And I think that's kind of the differential there. Raid is a completely different story. I think a lot of people do not find that stuff fun and would prefer if that one just didn't exist or became a party buff. But in terms of Mythic Plus, I think that the biggest thing is, just like Affixes, there's a different set of goals and groups trying to go for the push keys versus just casual 10s or 6s with friends. And Aug has a different place in both of those. And they're trying to do both. Can they separate it like Affixes? Who knows?
I would have liked to see more support support specs. I think the support specs are cool.
Exactly. I think that's I mean, there's like, not to keep yapping about Augs too much, but there's like that problem, right? Of what is a support spec, right? Like right now, if you were to define a support spec, you would just say it's an OP DPS that brings even more stuff, right? Like imagine if somehow you could bring 3 Augs. Like if that could work, you would just bring 3 Augs, right? But the whole reason that it's a support is because you can only bring one of them, right?
Yeah.
So like, I guess if there's this subclass of like, there's this OP class, but you can only bring one of, like, I think maybe if there was a bunch of different ones that you could select from, but that's sort of where everyone was, is they were confused of like, okay, they brought out Aug and they said they kind of want to make more support like classes, but like, how? It's not like they're going to take a spec like Rep Paladin. Like a lot of people have said Rep Paladin, right? It's not like they're going to rework a DPS spec that people have been playing for 20 years and make it into an Aug Evoker. Like imagine the outroar
I wish
that would be.
I mean,
right?
dude, people would be so mad, but God, I wish they would do something like that, because I think that archetype is like really cool. And I think that like the concept of, spreading your Ebb and Might, spreading your Prescience, and like extending that to buff your friends like over extended periods of time, like is cool. And like you were saying, fundamentally with how it works, you can only have one in your group. You're never stacking them. Like that's just not a thing.
All right, picture this, right? Mid-season 2 of War Within.
Okay.
Midway through the season, halfway through, brand new support spec comes out. just shakes up the entire season. Everybody gets the second support that they're waiting for. Boom.
Not today.
Problem solved, right?
Dude, no, not again. Hold on.
Right? Problem solved.
Go back, delete.
I'm letting them cook. I'm thinking that would be great. And then imagine if you could play both, and then you just have that plus Aug Evoker mandatory. Oh yeah, people would love that. That would be great.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's just hard, right? I think the problem is like they can't rework old specs, and like what are they gonna do? Add one support spec every expansion, so maybe by 2045 it'll be like, okay, now there's a healthy number of supports.
Okay, what if we just handpicked our least favorite classes and just reworked them to support specs? All right, so Holy Priest, I don't think that Priest needs 2 healer specs. All right, so Holy Priest, you got to go. Let me think. What's another good one? Enhancement? No. Elemental Shaman. You guys have been neglected for such a long time. I think that it would be a revival to your fan base if you got reworked into a support spec. You get to drop some totems. That would be kind of cool.
Is Ellie Shaman already gutted, by the way? Has Ellie Shaman all...
It's still fine, I think.
Okay.
Yeah. It was above 20% better than the other DPS.
One thing I think as a last beacon of hope for people who don't like Augs, I am seeing kind of the early signs of like very heavy coping coming from Augs. Like you think that if Aug was actually that OP, when the patch comes out, no one would care. But every single person like Tettles, Terathal, Cass, everyone is playing Aug like, no, these changes don't do anything. Aug is fine, guys. Aug is fine. 2% change, 3% change. Like, that's exactly what some class that just got nerfed into the ground would say. Like, just, the thing is, I know everyone's like, oh no, Aug is fine. But just imagine it was a Boomkin, right? Imagine if Boomkin got nerfed and then you heard Tettle saying, no, guys, it's fine. Okay. Like, everyone would be like, yeah, sure.
Listen,
Tettles.
I think it's...
So keep in mind, there is some coping that could be going on here with the Aug Evokers. We just need to wait to find out.
I think it's because a lot of people look at these numbers and they're like, wow, 30% off of Ebonmite is a fuck ton. Like, that is like a 30% damage nerf to Ebonmite is a lot, but I think it's just like people don't really... I think that Augmentation Evoker is probably the most misunderstood spec in the game by like a significant amount. What you're doing relative to what your group thinks you're doing, like there's just no world. It's like sometimes whenever Growl will play GeoGuessr in the middle of his key, that's like... It's like what your group thinks you're doing versus what you're actually doing. That's kind of like the same thing. Whereas like the Augmentation Evoker, what your group thinks you're doing is like completely different. Not that you're playing GeoGuessr, but
yeah, no, Aug is, I think, sort of the same comment about it being less good in lower level groups too. Like, it definitely really is. One sign of a good Aug Evoker, I feel like, is people that used to play healer. Not because like healers are the smartest, greatest players, because they are, but because you just are aware of what the healer's going through, so you know like when to use Rescue Shield to help just push the health bars up, when to use Cauterize, like when to dispel, like just knowing all those things because you play healer is actually pretty big.
I think healers unanimously make the best Augmentation Evoker players. All right, we got to move this forward, otherwise we're going to be talking about Aug for another 30 minutes, I think. All right, last week, Squishei, you made a comment about Mythic rating, saying that you thought the raid wasn't looking good. I think that we got to dig deeper on that. Hold on, I don't think that we could just leave that as an offhanded one-off comment. Why do you think the raid isn't looking great?
So, I think the bosses are looking a little rougher around the edges from the last test. I think everybody's heard about Mythic Silken Court as the first example. The main mechanic on Mythic Silken Court is it's the heroic version, but every time you get hit by certain mechanics, the raid drops an orb under you. And to kind of to back it up real quick, half the raid gets a blue debuff and half the raid gets a red debuff. If a person with the blue debuff ever touches a person with the red debuff, they both die. And whenever you get hit by mechanics on this boss, like this green circle that you see on screen right now, it summons an orb. And it can only be soaked by somebody of the other color. So you and the entire raid are playing Ring Around the Rosie, soaking orbs, and you have 15 seconds to soak every orb, or else it blows up and wipes the raid. All while doing the entire Silken Court encounter from Heroic, plus, increased damage and one-shots and all this kind of stuff. Most guilds in raid testing did not make it past, like, a minute into the encounter. It was crazy.
Can one boss really make the raid bad, though? Like, you're just talking about Silken Court here, which is the penultimate encounter of the raid. Can it make the entire raid bad?
I think the answer is yes, and my example would probably be Tindril. I think Tindril, for a lot of people, pretty soured the experience of Amir Jusel for a lot of guilds. I could be
man,
wrong.
I'm gonna open fire here. Max and Dratnos both said Tindral was like one of the best bosses of the expansion. When they said that, I was just like, now granted, to be fair, Max lives in a different world than everybody when it comes to rating, just sort of like how the top, the MDI people live in a different world. So I'll give him some slack there, but to actually think that people enjoyed that boss, Tindral was the most miserable. I don't know what it is about penultimate bosses where they like, I don't know. I don't know why I feel like there's just so many, right? What are some other examples? Stone Legion Generals
of bad penultimate bosses.
Yeah, it's like seems everyone. Carapace of N'Zoth even was like kind of bad. I don't know. I feel like
Zakul was pretty shit with the stop damage.
Zakul, I literally got so bored on Zakul of watching my team die to the random tentacles that were hard to see. I played Shaman on that boss. That my role that I just decided to give myself was I would walk in circles in Ghost Wolf and just say where the tentacles are and just be like, put colors everywhere and just constantly yell what the right colors were. Not casting any spells. I would literally have my camera in like reverse so I could see behind me and then just run around in Ghost Wolf and just yell, circle, green circle. That was me the whole fight while we were just stopping damage.
Dude, the fact that nobody said Broodkeeper, which is objectively a pretty bad boss, but there was other bad bosses that we had to say first, that is so funny.
You said Stone Legion Generals. That's all you needed to say.
There's so many. He's actually right. There's actually a lot of them that are like not great for whatever reason.
I feel like they always like think up two epic encounters and they're like, this one is the questionable one. This is the for sure good one. Let's make the for sure good one the last boss. And then this questionable one will make it the penultimate boss. And it's just always like a huge miss.
Yeah. I like Silken Court is one boss. Do I think it could ruin the raid? Yes. I think we need to see it. But given the way that things have happened in the past, I'm not looking forward to this boss. Especially when, this is a kind of a side tangent, a lot of the bosses as of recently are so tightly tuned that even though losing, it's not a raid, it doesn't wipe your raid, it wipes two people if they collide. That essentially just leads to a raid wipe because you're lacking damage. Like, a collision on Razageth early on, it would only kill those two people, but that would probably still wipe your raid because you need to either res both of them, or one of them, you're just doing the rest of the fight 19 men. And I think that is kind of one of my biggest problems with the raiding recently. It's just like deaths are usually just one shots, and you just need to res them, or you don't have the res and you wipe.
Okay,
you need all 20 people.
They started this in Dragonfly. I actually hate that they do this shit. Where just like there's so many bosses that have this one shot mechanic. Like Echo of Neltharion had it, Razageth had it. Like you're saying, like why do they keep doing this? Where this is like these bosses are just like one shotting you over and over again. It happened with Tindral and Fireack too.
I will say that while it's true that if the bosses are very tightly tuned and if you're trying to go for the kill, you need to reset, I would say that's arguably better than one big problem that I see is when it just literally blows up the whole raid. There's a lot of mechanics where it's like, you have to do this, and then if you don't do it, boom, everybody blows up. To me, by far, that's the most frustrating, like, mainly because it feels better to be in a pull more and to see further into the fight. Like, some of the most frustrating fights for me are fights like Tindral, or I can't think of any other example, but Tindral is like the first minute of the fight literally takes you 2 full nights of progression to get past the first minute of the fight. So while I agree with you that it's almost as annoying when you can't kill the boss when you have 2 people dead, I think I still always prefer that over, this guy messed, the whole raid blows up or everybody with blue blows up. Like, I do think giving you the option to see further in the fight does make progression feel a little bit better.
He missed two Sargeras era where that was some shit, that entire tier.
You don't want to know. But yeah, I think that's the big thing. Like, Silken Court has both, where 2 people can collide of different colors, blows both them up, or if you just don't soak an orb, it blows up your entire raid. So, like, those are things. Oh, also, if you soak more than 2 orbs at a time, you get more than that, you get a debuff that is permanent for the rest of the fight that just insta-kills you anytime you're rezzed. So, if you screw up at any point in the fight and soak 3 orbs, you get a permanent debuff, even through death, that does like 3 million DPS a second or something like that. It essentially just means you're staying on the floor the entire fight.
I'm a bit concerned about the future of raiding just as a whole. I feel like the state of raiding is like, basically since Legion, the amount of guilds that are progressing in Mythic has just been going down pretty consistently, and I'm starting to get worried about like the amount of guilds that we just have, like that are actively raiding in this game. I think this is something that's been shrinking over time, and I wonder if Blizzard's gonna have to pull the trigger on like a massive change to like kind of restructure and revitalize the raid scene.
I think very similar to what they did with the Affix rework, I do think they need to kind of rethink Mythic at some point. I don't know when the right time for that is. I think it's approaching, especially with that. I think it was a post from Dobie from Descent, kind of highlighting a lot of. It was Dobie, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, highlighting a lot of problems with Mythic rating. I think it's starting to come to a head, but it's not quite there yet. But Mythic rating is definitely it's a big time investment. Like, it's a lot of fun, but it is a pretty big time investment, and it's full of, tension, epic moments, but also, conflicts and stuff like that. And a lot of people don't want to put in the time for that, and that's totally understandable. But yeah, I mean, kind of back to the original point with the bosses, they have kind of 3 single target bosses in the raid, which is more than usual. And realistically, one of them didn't look good at all. That one's the 4th boss called Rashanan. It didn't really do much. There's one mechanic on it, which if you've ever seen the Dawnbreaker dungeon fight,
It's that guy.
It is the green waves where that is I like it is the only mechanic where except on heroic down you have 2 waves, one left, one right. On Mythic you have 3 waves, which are kind of 2 diagonals and 1 backwards or something like that. So like it is a little bit harder, but that seems to be the main mechanic that you can die to, and everything else is just kind of there and exists, and the boss just flies around and you kind of kill him.
That's the spider boss, right? That goes. That boss felt really weird because it would constantly like move around the room, and it was like over and over throughout the fight. You just have to move your whole raid across the room for no reason. It felt like very random. Like, I don't know why they think these move from X to Y parts of the raid is fun. Like, I think maybe one fight or whatever can do that sometimes, but like I feel like almost never are parts like that thought of well, where it's like there's nothing to fight and you're just like running and dodging through things.
I would argue Tindril did it well. I actually liked the Tindril dragon flying sections because it kind of gave you a break from the action. I do not find running for 10 seconds to the new boss landing position on the same platform exactly an enticing mechanic. But
yeah, or like Senarth, where like people actually freaking die.
Holy shit!
Right? That was one fight that I was thinking of. I was thinking either like the Sylvanas intermission in Shadowlands, or like Senarth, where it's like you're running, but it's like they're trying to make it hard or like make it a point, and it's like like at least I think the dragon riding part accomplishes exactly what you said of like. It's literally just like a chill, right? Like it's not meant to be hard even on Mythic. Whereas I think the problem that happens sometimes is they're like trying to make this feel epic and feel cool and dangerous. And instead you're just mad that the guy who's like tabbed out talking to somebody on Discord auto runs off the fucking cliff. And it's like, to me, that's what intermissions are. And it's just, I don't like them.
Tell that to all the people who missed the 3rd platform on Tindril or flew into a tree branch or something.
Oh, I told them every pull, don't worry.
But yeah, I like to kind of go. There's also another single target boss where it's kind of like Taros, where you combine with the Experiments Bleed, where you kind of just have to like place clones on the ground in certain spots and then blow them up using a Taros line. It's an okay boss. It's the 3rd boss, so I don't expect that to be hard. And then there's an actually good single target boss in Nexus Princess Kyvexa.
That fight's cool.
That is the one fight that like seems super awesome, cool strategy. Really looking forward to that one. But the other 2 just kind of like meh. I guess the 1st boss is kind of single target too, but again, it's also the 1st boss. The raid encounters, it feels like there's kind of nothing new. I think that's kind of where I'm landing with it. Also, just my personal opinion, not the biggest fan of spiders. So just it may not be for me, but in terms of hype for the raid, it's definitely on the lower side for me right now.
Well, Squishy, did you know that you can use Blizzard's brand new Arachnophobia mode in the War Within Premier expansion, and you can get that at promo code WOWHEAD20 at checkout?
No, I didn't, Ted.
I'm gonna inject a little bit of copium here. One thing I think will improve the raid experience, as much as people have been complaining about it. We might talk about it later. Is the well, we were running out of time, but the gearing stuff, and that when the gearing process is longer and you have this stacking buff they're bringing back to the raid, hopefully you get to the point where, number one, as a guild, you outgear it by a ton and you just mow down the bosses and deep farm. I feel like raids are usually remembered better if, like, once you beat the boss, you can just mow it down and you don't have to worry about it as much, rather than like Tindral, you're just like suffering through it every week until it gets really heavily nerfed. Also, like, the gearing thing, on top of that, it also gives guilds more, like, it allows more guilds to get that cutting edge and to try those bosses when it's like significantly easier than it was initially. So I think that I hope that they're that direction, on top of the fact that it's the first raid of the expansion. Usually that one's a little bit easier than the other raids, at least from the last couple expansions. So I have a little hope that those things are going to do well, but yeah, I've definitely been a little frustrated with the direction of raiding.
Interesting change coming to loot. We kind of talked about it a little bit last week with the myth track going 6 out of 6. Additionally, Blizzard then, after that, announced that the hero track gear from M+ was going to be dropping at 1 out of 6, and now the maximum loot dropping from M+ out of hero track is going to continue to be 2 out of 6, so very similar to what we had in Dragonflight. I felt like people were a little bit overreacting to the impact of this change, going from 1 out of 6 to 2 out of 6. I mean, it's just, I guess it's going to slow down your gearing. It requires you to spend a little bit more heroic crests, but it wasn't like going to cap the amount of gear that you were getting or something like that. It was just going to slow you down gearing wise.
To be clear, it's back at 2 of 6.
Yes, they moved it
back.
So they made this change. They put it at 1 out of 6, and then they walked it back immediately.
Yeah. I think it just kind of goes along the lines of, I don't think people knew what this was like going to actually do. It's very much play it and find out, but I think it just kind of goes along the lines of a lot of people saw the crafted gear, the myth track going to 6 before.
This was bad for M+ players, frankly.
and then they kind of fixed it with the crafting gear, and then another thing kind of came to Mythic Plus that kind of negatively impacted them, and they're still feeling things. So it's just kind of a very like feeling problem, because it's 15 crests per piece, but that does add up if you are gearing via the hero track.
I guess maybe the issue I have with it is like it's hero track gear, so like,
which is the top end for a lot of people.
I guess that yeah. But okay, but if you're getting hero track gear out of M+, you're doing like a 7 or an 8, right? Like, which is not. It's not like a low-level key. Like I'm gonna empathize with some of the people that are in this situation, but these aren't like a 7, an 8, a 9, a 10, especially in this new system, is not necessarily like a super low key. Like if you're still doing M0s and stuff like that, yeah, all right, you know, I can kind of understand where you're coming from with this, but I think that, you know, like if you're doing a 7, you're probably good enough to get enough crests to be able to get this to 6 out of 6.
Sure. But I also want to point out that the difference between a 9 and a 10, this expansion, is a lot bigger than previous expansions. You are gaining the other of Fortified and Tyrannical.
Sure.
That is a lot of extra time that is going to be invested in various things compared to previous expansions, where 10 just usually added an affix, which could range from 0 added time to minutes. Shout out bolstering and sinking.
That's actually huge. Just think about that for a second. Think about, so like, let's say Tyrannical adds like a minute to every boss.
Yeah.
Like, holy moly. You're looking at already, 2 to 2.5 minutes added because everything is increased in health. And you're looking at 3 to 4 minutes added on from Tyrannical. Yeah, this is going to be, I mean, it's going to be a progression curve, right? Like, I don't know, like maybe people will, it's hard to say. I think for the people that will enjoy these changes, or rather like feel more fulfilled by doing it, those are sort of like the quiet, majority, right? These aren't people that are going to be like, no, these hero track changes are great. Like, you just sort of, Blizzard is kind of like sliding the scale and thinking about how long exactly gearing is going to be. I think, again, the main concern always comes down to later on in the season and alts and stuff, right? Like, later on in the season, early on the first couple weeks, there's a lot more room with trying to get into 9s and 10s with lower item level and score, because everybody has low item level and score. But if they make gearing take take 3 months, and then a 10, they only invite you to a 10 if you have really good gear. It's like, well, it's going to take you so long to get that good gear when, you know, you can't even get myth track gear from your vaults anymore. You can't, like, heroic gear takes even more crests. Like, I think that's going to be the main concern. So again, with all these changes, I think could feel better and more fulfilling with your first character, but I do want to see them go towards, okay, let's how do we make this reasonable for alts like 3-4 months into the season, just like, you know, figure out how they can, you know, double triple the crests, or just like kind of lift the reins off for people who still want to play the game.
So we've actually been testing the dungeons at like the bottom range of like heroic gear. We're testing like 639 level, and I will say that 10s feel fine, dude. The moment that you get to 12 though, and you get that challenger's burden, it's like, holy shit, my boss went from being 2.5 minutes to 4.5 minutes. That is the one that's the percent modifier where you're like, oh my god.
Yeah. I mean, thankfully the majority of people probably won't hit that, but I don't think people realize how big of a step up 9 to 10 is this time around.
Sure.
It's a pretty big step up, but the thing is, you are rewarded for it this time around by myth track in your Great Vault. Yes. That is the one thing. Like, it is very rewarding to do a 10 as long as you can kill it. You don't need to time it realistically unless you want to keep your key. You get rewarded for completing that 10. It is going to be hard, though, this time around. And I think that's kind of what they were probably going for here.
As long as you want to keep your key. Dude, the poor civilians, man.
I mean, but then you go back to down to a 9, and 9 is going to be a lot easier than 10, so you can probably just more easily get it back up. So...
All right, so we got a new affix updated to the PTR, or to the beta. I don't know what to call it, PTR to the beta. It's called Devour. Basically, so whenever people initially read it, it puts a health absorb onto all players. The health absorb can be dispelled off. Whenever it's dispelled off of each individual player, you're getting a stacking crit buff, and you're also getting a stacking maximum HP buff per player that it gets dispelled off of. It was the data mined 4th affix that you were talking about. Now, if it doesn't get dispelled, and it's attached to a heal absorb, so it can also be healed off, kind of similar to how Afflicted works. And if it doesn't get healed off or dispelled off within 15 seconds, then it healed the mobs initially for 25% of their maximum health, now being nerfed to 10%. It was it came out a bit hot. Obviously, things like Mass Dispel and Poison Cleansing Totem are very good versus it. It's an Omni Dispel, so it's magic and basically all other Dispel types. So having a bunch of Dispels in your group, such as things like Poison Cleansing Totem, Mass Dispel, or huge. Imp Dispel even. You can dispel this multiple times as well. So because your Dispel's on like a 8-second CD, so in the last 15 seconds, you can get multiple Dispels if you want. But the problem is, if you accidentally don't notice that somebody still has it on them, then you start healing the absolute hell out of the mobs.
Yeah, I mean, thankfully it was nerfed relatively early on. They cut the absorb shield by a decent amount, and now it only heals 10% per stack. So I do think it's better, but I still think this has the exact problem that Afflicted has, which is, why would you ever heal this instead of just dispelling it?
So I actually don't think it has the same problem that Afflicted has, because Afflicted would wipe you if you got a 50% haste reduction. This doesn't exactly wipe you. It's kind of obnoxious. Like, I don't know how Growl feels about it from the healer perspective, but as like the person that's bringing like an off dispel, I just don't think that this is like really engaging.
Yeah, so well, let me clarify, because I played a lot on the first day, and I think they changed it a lot. So it puts a debuff on every single player, right? Now that debuff is similar to Afflicted in that anything can remove the debuff. So like a poison dispel, a magic dispel, anything, right?
Yes.
So essentially, what I worry about this, I don't know if worry is the right word, but it will restrict the meta quite a bit, because you will need either every single class in the game, or rather that you bring to your key, has a dispel, and then every time it goes out, you just press the dispel on yourself, right? Or you need some sort of class that is like Poison Cleansing Totem. I can't even think of another example that does it fast enough, right? That you press every single time every single time your team gets it, you throw down Poison Cleansing Totem, like basically mandatory Shaman Week or whatever, right? If that isn't already a thing.
Yeah.
Yeah, I feel like they missed a little bit with this one. To me, I don't really like. To me, it just feels like a talent check. Like, okay, did you bring this? If yes, then it's free. If not, it's almost absolutely miserable. And another issue that I have with it is very similar to all the other affixes, where you can get a situation that's like an overlap with a mechanic on a boss that's just like, what the heck are we supposed to do? Like, if you have a situation where you don't, now assuming that you can just mass dispel all of it off, you don't care about it, right? It's basically nothing. But if you're on a boss that's doing heavy AoE damage, and then you put a heal absorb that is half of everybody's health bar on every single player as a like we were doing Stone Vault, and it's just like we just can't even beat the first boss because they're just like doing this crazy AoE damage that people need to be topped. And the tank needs to be dispelled of the debuff, so my dispel isn't free, is taken as a healer. And then it's like, dude, what the heck? Like, I don't even. It just, I don't know. I feel like they missed a little bit with this one. To me, it doesn't feel very interactive or fun. It doesn't really feel like you're using your kit. You're just sort of like either just using Poison Cleansing Totem or Dispel. I think this has been my least favorite affix so far.
I 100% agree that it's my least favorite affix. I also think that the reward that you're getting with the crit and the maximum HP just doesn't feel, I guess, rewarding enough is how I would describe it. I think that they could really bump up the reward that you're getting whenever this actually gets whenever it gets removed from players.
Yeah, I mean, it's hard though, right? Because it's so easy if you do it right. Like, everybody, you only bring 5 classes that have a dispel. It goes out, you press your button. Like, how good could the reward really be, right? Like, it literally costs you nothing. It does nothing. It doesn't slow you down at all. But like, that's the only way you can really play it, right? Is you have to have 5 classes that have a dispel, or like, 3 and then a shaman with a poison cleansing totem or whatever, and then you just press 1 global every time it comes out, and then you're done. Like, I don't know. I think it was a miss.
I'm down for them to put this at like 15% to maximum health absorb on all players.
I almost wish I almost wish there was some way that they could do it so it does, like, it was only healing, but then it interacts. I don't know. I the way I was sort of thinking is like somehow like if it puts a healing absorb and a shield or something on people, so like it doesn't increase the lethality of it, but then it like you do have to heal it up instead
like a
of
cloud burst totem where you have to fulfill a certain amount, and if you fulfill over that amount, then
like something that doesn't, like, the shield, it's the healing absorb itself isn't lethal until you, because it sort of feels like it's like a double whammy, right? Like, number one, if you don't get it off of you, then it heals the mobs and it's bad, right? And if you just the fact that it's on you, it's draining health, and it's this heal absorb that means that you can't heal, right? So the problem with it is that double lethality of it, of like there are 2 different problems that you have to face, and it's like, I don't know. I feel like if they would remove one of those, where I guess the problem is the healing absorb, I guess, kills you during the dungeon, and they need to somehow address that, or or just as free. Like, I guess if they just make it super free and then everyone brings a talent, I guess that's okay. But it's kind of lazy to me.
Yeah. So I think one of the problems, like what I was talking about earlier, is like, why would you ever heal it when it's so punishing when you just dispel it? But I think I think like the way that I would personally solve this if I was, is I would make the shield be consumed by damage and increase the shield size. It can break via healing or by taking damage. So it's actually a benefit to keep it up in a way. Like, if you want to, but if it expires, then you still lose that damage.
That's almost too interesting. That's a cool idea, though.
Like the thing could be healed off. It could be damaged off by enemies. Either way, you get the buff or you heal enemies if it's not removed. So it's like you are playing with your own little, like, do I keep this on for the big AoE? At which point it will just automatically break and I'll be super survivable. Or do we want my healer to heal this off so that we get the buff? Something like that.
He's kind of cooking.
Right
I
now,
feel like that's too complicated, but it's really cool.
Well, dude, I mean, right now it's pretty complicated. If we had to play with this at like a high key level, the meta strat would be dispel 4 of them instantly, leave it on the person who is the most survivable, and then dispel that at the last possible second to refresh your buff as long as possible, which is dumb. Like, it shouldn't work like that.
Well, actually, okay. I mean, to be fair, though, at least it's adding some depth to it, right? Like, what I was complaining about, part of it was that it was way too boring, but I guess maybe there is some depth.
I don't like how it's a
leave the healing absorb on your tank or something. I don't know.
I think it's weird whenever it's 1 global to dispel or a 50% heal absorb, which is, how many globals are you pressing to heal 50% of everybody's HP, Growl? Like,
in current expansion, many globals.
Yeah, like it's 6 globals worth of healing. or one Dispel, and like these are not the same thing.
I think it could maybe also be solved. There's this boss in Mists of Pandaria when you heal one absorb, it does an AoE healing burst to everybody. And I think it could also be solved in some way like that, where once you get one off, it makes the other ones easier. Like maybe the buff is a healing increase.
Yeah.
Then once you get one off, it makes the rest more trivial. But right now, I think there's just a fundamental problem of why are there two ways to cure it when one is much easier than the others and realistically will heavily incentivize groups for the weak.
I'm gonna go out on a limb. I think they've been cooking with the affixes. I think this one's a bit of a miss. I don't think this one's like irredeemable. Like I think that we can get this one to a spot where it's like okay. I think that people really come out super hot and they're like, this has to be deleted and blah 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 blah. But like it's not great. I'm gonna be honest, it's not great. But I think we can get it to a spot where it's okay.
I agree.
I agree
hope
with that.
so.
All right, last thing before we go and talk to Yoda about some of the tank changes and the state of tanking. We have a cool stuff that we've seen in WoW this week, name pending. Currently, Growl on the sheet has Radiant Echoes and pre-patch leveling / Mog stuff. What is this sheet that I'm looking at?
Oh, so they have a new pre-patch event. I wanted to throw this up here early. Basically, number one, if you're trying to collect stuff, if you're wondering what the heck the pre-patch stuff is, if you're worried about next expansion, you don't need to do this at all.
Okay.
But if you care about it, what it does is they're basically a handful of mogs, weapons, armors, whatever. There's 2 mounts. There's bags that you can get if you're super broke, and there's 3 pets. And then like rings and trinkets and stuff too, if you really need to gear up. But TLDR, there's a list of mogs, and there's a spreadsheet here. We'll have the link in the description or show notes or whatever. And this is basically just a spreadsheet that tracks every single thing that you can get in the event. So if you are one of those nerds that wants to collect everything, you can use this to make sure you get everything. On top of that, apparently this is very, very good for leveling. If you do not want to do Mop Remix, everyone knows Mop Remix is going on. However, once you level in Mop Remix, you can't transfer your character over until I think the 20th. So if you are fiending for a way to level your guy, you can level through the pre-patch event. Basically, there's 3 invasion events that rotate between 3 different zones, and just doing them is very, very good. One thing to note is that you do not want Chromie time enabled when you have these. So if you have Chromie time enabled, which a lot of people do while they're leveling, it actually like only shards you away from like level 70 players because it thinks you're in Chromie time. So you actually want to make sure you have Chromie time disabled while you're doing this, because then you'll get in the zones with the other level 70 nerds that are mog farming, and then they just mow down everything, and then you get a lot of XP. Apparently it's like roughly 3 to 4 hours to get to 70 through this, so a very, very good leveling means if you don't want to do Mop Remix.
I've seen Remix be like hour and a half or 2 hours recently, hasn't it?
Tettles, you're muted.
I wasn't muted to stream. Oops. I've seen Remix be like an hour and a half to 2 hours recently. Is that true?
Well, so Remix, you get a little bit of XP if you've already beaten it once. You get an XP bonus. So if you've played through Remix, if you have the stuff unlocked, if you have stats, then yes. Basically, what the TLDR with Remix is you get these XP threads that increase the amount gained. So what you do is you spam dungeons and you leave all of your end of dungeon rewards in your mail, and you don't pick them up, the XP rewards, and then you get as many XP threads on your cape. Like basically you level from 1 to 40, not opening anything, and then at level 40 you just open your mail and you get all the XP with the biggest bonus you can get, and you just go straight from like 40 to 70, and that takes like roughly an hour and a half to 2 hours.
Yeah, if you don't want to do that or don't have it set it up though, this is an amazing way to level.
Yep, and this is if you actually want to play your guy. Like if you want to do stuff and play your guy before the transfer in the 20th or whatever, that's what you do, is you level through pre-patch.
Cool. Yep. As for other stuff, I got a weak aura. So basically, if you want to do dungeons in Season 1 on the beta at all, I would highly recommend downloading this Weak Aura. It's the Season 1 dungeon, War Within Weak Aura by Terathal. We referenced him earlier whenever we were talking about Growl's friend who's beholden to Aug prison at any given moment. He also likes to make Weak Auras. He makes a lot of the... I would describe this as the Weak Aura that a high key player makes for other high key players, where it's basically just like... It's a bit beyond just like a rudimentary like Kazi's speak to you weak aura. It's like for very specific mechanics, and he'll add very specific functionality like totem HP, bars, and stuff like that, where you're able to actually like see like the probably the most important things in each and every single dungeon. It's not like a ton of stuff, but it is quite good. I would definitely recommend having it. Good. Squishei, what did you have for your cool stuff?
For me, we have a release candidate on the beta now. And that likely means that we will no longer have weekly beta builds anymore, which is very sad. We will just be getting a ton of hotfixes, which is mostly just tuning. We may get one more beta build, but it's looking like we're in that phase now where they're just spamming out hotfixes. And this is the scary time where they start class tuning at the very last minute and can swing your class on a dime. So be prepared to be maybe happy, maybe sad, or down in the dumps and posting sad memes on Twitter, like Tettles was, at certain points in his career.
I'm beyond that. That's old me. I'm actually kind of sad. I actually like the weekly builds. I
do too. It's possible we still have them, but it's looking like they're pushing hotfixes fairly frequently at this point. So I'm expecting all class tuning to come via hotfixes at this point. But we'll see. I could be wrong.
Okay, cool. Beyond that, I think it's time for the main event. We had a chance to catch up with Yoda earlier today and kind of talk about the state of tanking, what tanks are looking like in M+. A lot of it coming down to, there was this massive blue post a couple weeks back talking about how tanks are no longer supposed to be viable and how the healer's supposed to heal the tank and stuff like that. And we saw a lot of disgruntled tanks talking about that. And so we had a chance to catch up with Yoda, and let's take a listen in to that conversation from earlier today.
So one of the hottest topics on the beta and going into War Within today, the status of tanks. Blizzard has come out with a long blue post detailing their ideal of how we're allowed to play the game. Tanks should need healing. They shouldn't be self-sufficient. And who's a bunch of us to talk about tanks? We're joined with Yoda, a guy who's been playing probably some of the most beta of anybody. He's a longtime MDI high key pusher, TGP player, MDI Spring Champion, LAN finalist, Heroes of the Storm specialist, Heroes of New Earth specialist, world first Final Fantasy 14 raider, and one of my good buddies. What's going on, Yoda?
What's up? Thank you for the intro.
That was an insane hype intro. I mean, look at his YouTube page too. So basically, if you're looking for like good tank content, I would recommend going and watching Yoda's stream or go watching Yoda's YouTube. He is putting out an insane amount of content lately, including. I was scrolling down and I realized that the Yoda videos I've watched are all tier lists, which maybe speaks more to me than to him. But Yoda, I guess, just in general, how have tanks been feeling?
It's kind of okay. You just need for most tanks, you just kind of need a good relation with your healer, I guess.
Is that good? Do you like that? What's your like ideal? And you're pretty like well-rounded, like you understand like, the game has to be fun. There's different types of players. For your like, if you had the magic wand to design the game, how would you have it in terms of like how reliant tanks and healers are and like what their role is together?
Honestly, I think it's okay if there's like some tanks that are like their thing is that they're independent and others like don't need, others like need healing, I guess, but they have other useful things. I think that's okay.
Do you think they sort of how close are they to that mark? Like for example, if you've been playing a lot of like what are the more self-sufficient tanks? Maybe like Blood DK for sure. I don't know. I guess Prop Paladin historically bad. Yeah. What do you think about like where are they on the marks on individual tanks? If you don't mind going through them.
Okay. Honestly, it's pretty close. I think Blood DK is the only like self-sufficient tank left. I feel pretty healer reliant on like all the other ones. Honestly, I haven't played that much Warrior, but they only have that one heal every now and then from Victory Rush, so you're definitely going to be a bit healer reliant. Brewmaster definitely requires external healing, but they're really good at receiving healing, I guess, because they have stagger and they have their passive that makes them get healed more. Paladin used to be relatively close to self-sufficient, but I think it's the biggest change is Paladin. In War Within, they're like nowhere near self-sufficient. They require a lot of healing.
Really?
Word of Glory heals for like nothing, and it also makes you go if you spam it too much. So yeah, I think they kind of did that to Paladin. Demon Hunter also kind of feels the same way. A lot of your like, you're kind of healing yourself a lot on big pulls because your soul generation is healing you for so much, but on the smaller pulls, especially single target, before you would just like soul cleave the boss 10 times and apply a bunch of frailty and then heal yourself off that. Now you still try to do that, but it's not nearly strong enough, I think.
Dude, what was going on with this blue post? I mean, so we saw this blue post come up about 2 weeks ago at time of recording this, and Blizzard basically stated that they wanted the tanks to be healed more by the healers, and damage intake should be steady but not too fast. But at the same point, I don't like. Have they even achieved what they were stating in this blue post? Like, is this like, have they achieved this?
I mean, some of the things I feel like were on the mark, like they nerfing like frenzied regen and soul and like the frailty healing from Demon Hunter and some other thing, like some of the monk healing.
Okay.
Definitely was in the right direction, I think, if that's their goal. I mean, it wouldn't be my goal, but if that's their goal, they did that part right. But then there's also a bunch of notes where they just like reduce tanks and max health and the effectiveness of their damage reductions or the increased cooldown, less duration, whatever it is. Like if you go to Paladin, they like reduce their armor, reduce the effective consecrate, I think, and they also on top of that made Sentinel not last as long. So it feels like someone like some tank hurt someone at Blizzard, I guess. That's what that feels like. But yeah, like if they wanted to nerf the self-sustain, I get that, and that's if that's their vision, fine. But the other part of their post where they said they want tanks to not get one shot and not have to kite, like all the nerfs to the damage reduction abilities just are completely opposite of that.
Growl, have you noticed that like you have to heal the tank a lot more in dungeons like post to this change?
It's really it's tough for me. Because I just don't know when people are testing builds, when people are making mistakes and stuff. It's one of those things as a healer where I just sort of like, I think Yoda's similar in terms of just like, we don't really think that much about how the game should be. We just like play, like they just tell us how to play and we just try and play the best we can. So I don't really think about it too much in terms of like how like, it doesn't, I don't really think about who I'm healing. I just sort of like, okay, the tank needs healing. I don't know why, or if they, you definitely need to heal more. I do feel like it's a little bit of a mix of tuning. Also, I think like it's a little bit of like early expansion stuff. I know you've played like the beta cycle in the beginning of a lot of different expansions, Yoda. How much do you feel like it's like the way tanks are feeling are just because of like the stat squish and people not knowing builds and stuff versus like the tanks actually being nerfed? Like, do you see things feeling a lot better maybe by the end of the season when everyone's in like max gear and stuff?
Yoda?
Oh shit! Hello.
Hi.
Definitely didn't have push to talk on. Okay. So it'll definitely feel better towards the end once people are playing a lot more optimal. Right now, like if you mess up as a tank but you don't die, then it kind of just falls on the healer to carry you through. So I think healers are feeling a lot of the burden, especially on beta. And on live, that should not happen as much, I guess.
Are there more tank busters? Like one of the things that they were talking about is like about defensive layering being like a super good thing, and then they were going to reduce the amount of tank busters. But I swear this expansion just has more tank busters than average, right? Where they're like, tank busters will still create challenging moments that reward tanks for planning and smart use of cooldowns. I feel like every pack has a tank buster in it, right?
Yeah, that part I feel like they missed the mark because basically to tank like any realistic pull that you need to do to time the key, you just need to like have a cooldown rotation going the whole time, and that's just like your quote unquote tank buster. Like Bone Claw has like a 5-second cooldown and 3 different mobs have it. Like what are you supposed to do? Have something for all of them? No, you just have to have a cooldown rotation rolling the whole time. So I don't know if their plan was to like fight only one of those mobs at the same time or something, and then cooldown every Bone Claw, then that's a complete miss. That's never going to happen.
I mean, they did a recent change on the beta to a lot of tank busters reducing their damage. Do you feel like that's enough, or do you feel like they still need to go further with that?
The boss changes were definitely good, but they haven't done anything with the trash tank busters. So I feel like maybe a trash tank buster pass would definitely go a long way.
Kind of tangential question: are there any fervents, or is that? Do you know?
Yes, actually, there are. In Siege of Bralis, in particular, there's a mob that teleports, like he blink strikes to a friend, and he also has a fervent strike.
Fun.
So yeah, a lot of the time he'll just like teleport out and then fervent someone, and then like yeah, nice.
First boss of Arakara had one until this week.
Oh yeah, I remember that,
dude. I got killed by that boss one time. I was just like standing there, like, how does this even happen to me?
Speaking of bosses, how do you feel like tanking's been on bosses since the nerf? You said they were like pretty good in terms of tank buster. What's your thoughts like overall, maybe not just specifically about the tank changes, but like how the tank mechanics are on bosses? How does it feel to tank them, like needing a healer a little bit? Do you like I feel like even before Dragonflight tanks were like pretty self-sufficient on bosses, do you feel like even one boss smacking you like need a lot of healing, or like for the most part is before, I guess? Like maybe give us a comparison on like what it feels like to tank a boss on a high key.
It kind of depends on the boss, I guess. Like specifically in Stone Vault, there's like two of the bosses that are very, very hard for tanks. That recently did get nerfed, but they're still kind of hard. I guess it also depends on the tank too.
That makes sense. There's like, so do you think part of what they were going for maybe is like trying to keep every class to like have its identity? Like the problem with every class being invulnerable, right, is you don't really feel like, oh, I'm a blood DK, oh, I'm a Prow Warrior, I'm really good at blocking this, you know? It's just like each you actually feel like, okay, this tank is good for this boss and so on.
Never thought about it like that even. Holy moly.
Yeah, there's definitely a lot of that going around. Like any boss with like a heavy buster, Brew is just like LOL stagger and they get healed through, but some tanks are in real danger of getting one shot permanently.
That's one thing I guess I noticed a big difference between End of Shadow, or not, maybe not End of Shadow, or Drag, or and a BFA, sorry, BFA versus now is during BFA there was definitely that sense of like, okay, I have this tank, this is how I'm supposed to heal it. Nowadays it feels like well, at least in Dragonflight Age, you like barely, you put like minimum healing on the tank to make sure he's top, but the most part he's like in charge of himself. And that's sort of how I feel like the changes want to be, is they want it to feel like you notice the tank that you have in your party, not just like the healer tank relationship, but like, oh, our tank is this, he's good at these pulls, or we can do like these bosses easier. I don't necessarily know if I think that's good for the game, but it's certainly like, I think, a little more interesting and flavorful, I guess, as long as it doesn't hurt the gameplay too bad. You don't seem too down on the tank changes. I feel like everybody is like up in arms and like really hating this, but you've probably played more than everybody, and you don't think it's too bad, or are you just like accepted it now?
I mean, it's like Blizzard's in charge, right? Whatever they do, we have to play.
Yeah.
I think the people that this is going to hurt more are like, I don't know if you've tried to pug recently, but if you ever open LFG, like most of the groups are just like a healer 3 DPS waiting for a tank.
Yeah.
And I would venture to guess like half of those, just like a tank joins, dies on like the first or second pull, and then it's a GG, go next, right? So I think this change, I think, is going to hurt those groups the most, those people the most. They're going to feel it the most. Like people are going to stop. Less people are going to play tank with these changes, and the people that do play tank are going to have a harder time. So, like, I think I can probably manage, but I think the pug world is going to suffer the most.
I will say the two biggest bottlenecks in terms of like role design is tank and healer for World of Warcraft just in general. And so I think that like anything that could get more tanks and more healers to be able to play the game, to allow just in general more groups to be able to form, that's always, I think, a step in the right direction. I don't know. Like Squishei, you played tank for a long time. Was this post, like, was the wording that was even in this post like concerning to you?
So I originally had a pretty negative reaction to it. I don't like nerfing tanks ever, because I think it kind of hurts people who enjoy playing tanks. But as of recently, I've found that it wasn't as big as I thought it was. And also, I kind of had a thought that, and Yoda, I'd want to know your opinion on this. This would potentially allow healers to more easily carry a bad tank. Which isn't the great way of saying it, but when you had a bad tank in this expansion, it was really noticeable because they were solely responsible for themselves. And while it hurts to nerf tanks so they're not solely responsible for themselves anyways, and that feels bad to people who are capable of it, it does allow the healer to kind of pick up some of that slack and potentially open the door for more people to try tank, because it's not as punishing if you're not as good at it or learning. And like, do you think that like that's what Blizzard maybe even be going for?
I think as a goal, that's a pretty good goal, but if that was their plan, they completely failed with their tank changes. Like as kind of I mentioned before, like all the times that they nerfed the tank's survivability abilities, like nerfing tank's armor, max health, increased cooldowns, reduced strength on their like tank abilities. Those are like having the opposite effect. Like tanks are just going to take more damage, which means if they were getting one shot before, they're going to get one shot even more now.
How's Aug for tanks? Is it still mandatory?
Oh no.
It's the same as before.
Okay.
Do you see a world? I've heard suggestions that they just stop Aug from buffing healers and tanks. I don't know. How do you feel about Aug? I feel like it's in such a weird spot now where it's actually not even that good in high keys, in mid keys, but in high keys it feels mandatory. Do you have any ideas? Like, again, I know you're not a game dev, but like, how the heck do they fix Aug? Like, what do they do at this point?
My suggestion was they make Aug not buff tanks and healers, and then buff tanks and healers baseline so that it's like they had an Aug in the group, and then have Augs only buff DPS.
Yeah, I was actually talking to a healer friend of mine, and he mentioned that he didn't really like the state of healing, and specifically, like, his suggestion was just like make healing stronger. Like the amount of globals it takes to top people is just like a little bit too much, and then when you factor in like people who are noob tanks or noob healers or whatever, so I guess it's hard for me because I don't know what the game will be like exactly when it goes live, but I do think just flat out buffing tanks and healers like maybe slightly would be not like making them way more OP, but just like, you know, just like a flat out 10 to 15% like tankiness and healing buff.
I guess, is there an issue with making tanks and healers just like universally stronger? Like healers do something more whenever they're actively healing, that way you're not bringing two healers, and tanks actively do more damage or whatever whenever they're actively tanking, that way you can't bring two tanks. Like, is there an issue with like just making those two roles just like super overpowered?
What you're describing is vengeance, and that existed, and every tank wants that, and Blizzard does not want to go back to that, I'm pretty sure. I mean, I think you saw the reaction. Do you remember in Shadowlands Season 3 when Guardian Druids had the OP tier set and were topping DPS meters?
Actually, I remember that. Everyone cried so much.
And do you remember the reaction? Yeah, exactly. Do you remember the reaction to that? It was all over Twitter. It was all over Reddit. It was all over social media. And then it got shot hard.
Three times.
Run down.
Multiple times, and became a very mediocre tier set. Like, it's very clear that the community and maybe even the developers do not want tanks doing damage, regardless if they are tanking or not, or if there's a way, like, you couldn't do that all the time. So what's the issue? And the issue is that the community just doesn't seem to want it. They don't want their tanks doing damage for some reason. And I don't think that's exactly fair, but yeah.
Well, I guess one question, Yoda. I see that you, I'm sure you'll be ready for this one. This is a great Twitch chat question. I see you're actually playing with DPS Evoker. I'll save the tank tier list for your channel if people want to find them. But in terms of healers, do you have a preference now that you're tied to the hip and you're forced to be surviving with the healer? Do you feel like there's any healers right now in the beta that you're like, okay, nice, this guy's on this, or when someone's on it, you're like, oh no?
I mean, not really. I'd say all the healers that I've played with are kind of okay-ish. Druid, I think, maybe needs some help with how they heal. I think when they have to heal the tank and the group, they suffer because like regrowth's their main spell that heals a lot right now. But like Shaman, DPS Evoker, and HPAL all feel fine, I think.
More on the player then. You know, you don't have to name any names, but
it's definitely more on the player, yeah.
There was a couple other changes that I guess weren't directly aimed at tanks, but they impact probably the tank as the most important role for M+. One of those is actually the nerfing of Fortified, going from 30% damage modifier to 20%. Do you think that they need to continue to do more stuff like this? And then they also hit a lot of hard-hitting abilities like Squishei was talking about earlier. You know, like Voracious Spike going down, stuff like that. Is this the state that we need to see whenever the tank survivability is what it is, or is it something that, you know, the tanks are just going to have to adapt?
I mean, those changes definitely help. I think something that they seem to be confused on is like melee damage.
Okay.
So a lot of tanks, they in the post multiple times, I think they mentioned like sustained like damage that the mobs do to the tanks as melees, but actually the way that tanking kind of works nowadays is like you need mitigation up permanently, otherwise you get one shot by just melees. So I think if they reduce damage from mob melees, that would go a long way towards making tanks not get one shot. Healers would have more agency.
Did you remember whenever they nerfed white swings in Shadowlands Season 1 because they were killing all the tanks.
Somebody linked me my old post going over all those changes because I was tanking back then, when tanks were literally kiting to do 10s because it was that bad. And thankfully it's not that right now, but kind of a related question. How do you feel like the addition of Fortified and Tyrannical and then the extra Affix at 12 has affected like tank damage on bosses and, you know, bosses and just trash?
It being fortified every week, I guess, because for tanks, I guess Tyrannical is usually like kind of free. The bosses are almost always not really challenging. It's almost always trash. That's hard. So it being fortified every week is definitely gonna change some stuff. I guess you don't get like a break week basically. Like on Tyrannical, you're basically playing like higher damage builds and trying to like parse on bosses. But
That
on
makes sense.
fortified, you're playing like, you know, as tanky as you can. So now I guess you just play tanky all the time.
Did you like that change of going back and forth between Fort and Tyrant, or do you prefer weeks being the same?
No preference, I guess. Although I don't know what they're going to do with the scoring system. Do you just need half the keys now or something? I don't know how it's going to work. It was kind of nice when I think having Fort and Tyrants different was kind of okay because you had like 16 dungeons. Now you have 8 dungeons. So I don't like that part. But in terms of like as it relates to tanking, it doesn't really matter that much to me.
Also,
enough.
recently, in the tuning pass that happened a few days ago, we saw basically like straight up pretty big damage buffs across the board. Even like the better tanks are getting damage buffs. Do you have any thoughts on like how those are integrated? Do you think that like made any tanks a lot better, significantly worse? Like, what do you think about just specifically the most recent tuning pass on tanks?
I like that they're buffing tank damage across the board. I guess if they're going to be squishy, at least they should do some damage, maybe. Some of the tanks got like way more than others though for some reason. Like Vengeance Demon Hunter got like one of their talents just got buffed by like 300%, so they're just doing crazy damage now for some reason. I don't know why exactly. And then also they stealth nerfed Paladin, which is kind of a heartbreaker to me.
Ooh.
Wait, what do they do to Paladin?
The Lightsmith, the secret weapon, got nerfed.
Oh,
There's like no patch notes that I've seen about
Oh,
it.
that's
but
right, because
it
the
does a lot
whole
less
the holy
damage.
one did as well. Yeah,
Yeah.
they nerfed it for both specs.
Yeah, so it feels kind of weird that just random tank specs are getting buffed and random other ones are getting nerfed when the damage was fine. But yeah, I like tanks doing more damage across the board.
In your opinion, how much like damage do you feel like a tank should do compared to a DPS spec?
I don't really have a good answer for that. But I mean, I would be happy if it was like 80, I guess.
80?
80%.
Dude, I mean, I feel like right now on AoE, tanks are doing... I don't know. I feel like tanks are probably getting close to 80% of a DPS on AoE.
I feel like it's hard because skill level plays a big factor in it. Like, generally speaking, right, the tank's rotation is a little bit more basic because the tank has a lot of other stuff to worry about, like staying alive, whereas the DPS rotation, like, gets complicated and it scales with how good of a player you are. And I think it's really hard because, like, let's say if Yoda can do 75% of the damage that I'm fired up can do, like, what percentage of Janky's damage is Yoda gonna do? Like, he's gonna be doing 1.5 times my damage at the same gear, and it's just like, I feel like that's a real, like, I definitely sympathize with tanks and wanting to blast. I think especially with like making choices about your gear and talents, like foregoing defense for damage, I think should feel good. But at the same time, like, I also understand that everybody is not that good in lower keys, and if a tank can just run around and mash, like, that was the biggest problem with the druid set change, right? Is like, as a druid you just walk around and mash one button and you're just like beating every DPS, and it like definitely feels bad.
Yeah, that's right. Okay, I'll admit it. I'll say a tank in full DPS talents and gear should do maybe 80%. How about that?
Okay. It's one of those things too. It's like, it feels bad as a DPS if you ever get beaten by a tank, but I think that's just due to like what our perspective of tank damage is supposed to be, and like what it's been for such an extended period of time. Not that it necessarily couldn't change, but I think that's just a matter of like what our perspective has been with that. And with the bear druid thing, people were running double tank, and I feel like that is the ridiculous issue. I feel like, you know, with at least with like the vengeance mechanic, you would have to be taking damage to be able to rebuttal that as like some damage dealt. Whereas that was, I think any situation where it's ever optimal to play two tanks, like, that's a mistake.
I agree with that. Now, kind of
definitely.
slightly related to that, Are there any threat issues on the beta right now? Like, do you find yourself losing threat just doing a rotation, or
Threat
is it pretty good right now?
Yes, threat mentioned bat.
Honestly, I have more issues. I had more issues in TGP than I have on beta
Great.
with aggro.
Good to hear.
Then again, on beta, we're kind of doing smaller pulls, and in TGP, there'd be like 4 packs coming from like 5 different directions, and you'd have to tag everything and actually do good damage to it. So I don't know.
My tinfoil hats. It's because you're not playing Vengeance Demon Hunter anymore, and that spec just.
I've been playing some, but Vengeance does a lot of damage right now. So.
I mean, that spec just generates no threat in the past either. I mean, it was just like so weird. I actually don't even understand how that happened.
Yeah.
Also, the deadliness of packs on the beta. A lot of you can't even combine half the miss pulls. Like,
oh, dude, we're pulling 5 mobs at a time. Oh my god.
Yeah. So I doubt that's happening for a while. But just kind of curious in that, since I know I don't think it's fun for anybody when the mob goes to beat on a DPS or something.
Yeah. Like if I haven't hit the mob with anything, then it's fine. Like I don't mind if it's gonna go kill someone because that means I made a mistake. But if I've just been like doing my full rotation, hitting it, and then it just looks at someone else after that, that feels bad.
Yep.
That is good though. I like not having threat problems. One thing you mentioned is that beta is kind of weird and kind of wonky and a lot of stuff going on. Do you have any I don't know what I guess the best phrase would be, advice for maybe people who are like newer tanks, people who are like looking to get back into the game and they see all this nonsense on beta? Like how much weight would you put into some of this stuff? How do you expect keys to change maybe in a live setting, especially like in pugs? Do you think from what you've seen so far, do you think class change or like what class you play is going to matter a lot? Should you play like what you want to play? Maybe go into a little bit of that. Like what sort of advice would you give someone who's like a general tank player looking at this expansion? Like what sorts of stuff should they parse out of this info in the beta?
Honestly, I think class balance is pretty good right now among tanks, and I think Blizzard is like trying really hard to make it good because it hasn't been this good in a while. A lot of people were like very scared of the Dragonflight season 3 and 4 meta of Vengeance Demon Hunter just being hard required in every key because they were better at everything. I don't think that'll be even close to the case in within season 1. You can just play what you want. And if you're newer, probably play Guardian. I think it's probably one of the easier tanks.
I always prefer whenever tank meta is a lot more open because I feel like at least in M+, it's like the tank skill is the most important thing, I think, for your ability to be able to time a key. And so whenever the tank meta is a lot more open, you're able to play with your friends a lot easier. You're able to see a lot more different classes and honestly like design routes and stuff like that around that specific tank's strengths, as opposed to, oh, we're playing a Vengeance Demon Hunter, he's gonna triple sigil this pack, and then we're just gonna AFK the entire time.
Yeah, that's gone.
Yeah, I mean, you sound optimistic, though. I feel like from an outsider's perspective, like I haven't played the tanks, I feel like I hear a lot of doom and gloom, so it's refreshing to hear you being, like, at least not that bummed out about it. Like, I get that you're sort of like, it is what it is, but maybe just to wrap a few things that people would want to be interested in before you send you off. So if you think tanking seems like in a reasonable place, it feels a little bit balanced. How are you feeling about the dungeons in the beta right now? I know this might be a rough question. Maybe like in terms of fun level, in terms of mechanics, like how would you compare them to the last maybe 2 expansions of dungeons?
Probably an upgrade over Shadowlands, but I actually really like the Dragonflight dungeon pool especially at the beginning, and probably I would say this one's a bit worse. Although, like, especially the season 1 pool, I don't know how they like picked Siege and Necrotic Wake.
Oh,
and then also made Mist worse. That was kind of awkward. But the new dungeons in War Within, actually, I kind of like those.
I think it's one of those things too that like it's really easy to like negatively talk about the dungeons, but I think the game is probably going to be in a decent state where that's going to at least be fun.
Yeah, I mean, I think it'll be good. Well, the only thing I'm worried about is like I said before, like with Tyrannical and Fortified, you had effectively 16 dungeons, and now you're only going to have 8. So
Are you talking about score, right?
Yeah, for score, and I mean, and for like just learning the dungeon, right? Like you learn the dungeon on Fortified, and you learn the dungeon on Tyrannical. They're like 2 completely different dungeons, honestly, with how you have to play them. And that's gone. Like I didn't like it when we went from like 12 total dungeons in BFA to 8 in Shadowlands, I think it was. Now we're going from 16, like that was like 32 or whatever dungeon. No, sorry, can't do math. 24 dungeons, right? If you count fortified and tyrannical. 16. Now we're going from 16 to 8. So not a big fan of that, but other than that, yeah, I think the dungeons are okay.
I mean, we get 8 every single patch, and if they're bad, like, I mean, we don't have to play them next season, kind of.
Yeah.
I worry a little bit about the replayability, but I also think they have a system in place where there's, for the people who really want to go hard, there's MDI or TGP every single season. We saw you guys did really well, actually, with your new up-and-coming team, Drogo's team. Do you have any plans? Or I know it's very, very early, but do you have any thoughts on, like, if you want to do MDI TGP next season? Do you have any plans on, like, people that you might want to play with, or is it still just up in the air?
Probably not playing MDI, but I'd say it's up in the air, but probably not playing.
Yeah, it's a lot of work. Not to be like negative about it, but it's one of those things where like you just put in 12 hours a day every day, and it's like you can't even imagine yourself doing it again.
Not to put words in Yoda's mouth, but every single season that he competed in the MDI or the TGP, he'd always come out with a tweet immediately after, be like, "I'm never doing this shit again," then show back up later on. And we didn't get one of those this season. We did not get one of those here.
It didn't happen that many times, right? One time I retired, I thought I was gonna go play Diablo 4, and then Diablo 4 turned out not to be catching my interest that much, so I'm lucky.
You're not worse than Equinox, but it's close. We're getting really close here on the retirement comeback story.
Holy.
I guess the last question: what are the big winners and losers you think of this season for tanks?
I guess the biggest losers would be Vengeance Demon Hunter, because before they were just required in all keys, and now they're not. And I think Prop Paladin got significantly worse than on live. Then all the other tanks, I think, are winners, I guess.
I noticed Dorky's been playing a lot of Prop Paladin. Do you think, is Prop Paladin like still pretty fun and just not that strong, or is Dorky just an idiot that likes playing bad tanks?
It's the latter. It's always the latter.
I mean, it's definitely fun. It's just like not that strong right now, I guess. And the Word of Glory change definitely hurts big time. Like on live, I think Word of Glory heals on baseline like a quarter of my health, and on beta, I'm pretty sure it's like less than a tenth. I think it's a 12th.
Oof.
It's like a massive nerf.
So if there's one change to Paladin, would that be it, or would it be something else?
I mean, Paladin is one of those tanks that kind of like has a hand in everything. So if they buff any one thing, then it kind of works. You can balance it around. But yeah, Word of Glory would be nice. I don't think they're going to do it because they're trying to push this theme of tanks needing healers. But if they're going to do that, then giving something back somewhere else would be nice.
Sounds good.
Any final thoughts, comments from anybody else before we let Yoda get out of here?
I will. He doesn't do enough of shouting himself out. I do want to give a major shout out to Yoda's stream and Yoda's YouTube. He's someone who I think did it a lot more casually, but it feels like he's been on consistently like top 10 on the ladder. He's been consistently making videos, doing tier lists, talking about stuff, giving what the people want to hear. I think Yoda generally is like, I mean, obviously, right, is very well spoken and well thought out, and really like thinks a lot in terms of like what advice he gives to people. So I'd highly recommend if you're a tank. I know my good friend Dorky makes content, but I definitely want to give a big shout out to Yoda's stream and Yoda's content. He's like definitely the guy who's just always on the grind, always playing like high keys and in there, and knows a lot about like literally every single role, tanks, healers, DPS. So big shout out to Yoda. Thanks for joining us today.
Thanks for having me.
Yeah, thanks for your time.
All right, I'm sure that was an enlightening conversation and equally impressive pass back to us in the present here. So the last thing we got some Q&A. Thank you guys so much again for all those who sent in the Q&A. If you want, just tweet at our Twitter as well to send us any Q&A. It has open DMs if you want any questions asked. There's also a chance that you can just DM me on Discord. I'll also field it. You can just tweet at thebenchwow on Twitter or x.com, whatever you want to call this thing, if you want your Q&A answered. There's a few different ways that you might be able to get it asked or answered. The worst way is probably putting it in the YouTube comments, because there's a lot of those, but there's also a chance that you could get it answered in the YouTube comments. For the first piece of Q&A that we have today, we have a question from Raghelm that asks, how would you redesign the reward structure for M+? Currently, there's a huge gap between hitting Keystone Hero or Keystone Master and then hitting the 0.1% title. How could Blizzard reward players between 2,500 and 3,600 plus? Growl, you want to take this one?
Sure. One big thing that I think people are going to come to realize the jump between this is going to be a lot different because now we have plus 10s add fortified and tyrannical, and we have plus 12s adding this huge mob HP and damage.
The bargain.
So
Yeah.
this little twilight zone of between, you know, like 10s and 17s or something like in current patch is gonna, I think, shrink a little bit. I don't think we're gonna see keys go nearly as high just because this zone is gonna be so dense with difficulty that it's basically gonna be the high keyers right above this zone, and then title range, you know, stops at 10. So I think that zone is gonna cut down a little bit. It's yeah, I'm not really sure. I mean, personally, I'm always for them just adding stuff. I don't think we need to reinvent the wheel or do anything crazy in terms of rewards. I think adding just, you know, whatever, pets, mounts, you know, anything for any sort of level, you know. Now, I think 12s is a pretty good level. That there's a pretty big gap between doing a 10 and then doing a 12. And then especially the fact that 12 is sort of like the seasonal, like, oh, Zalatath's going away or whatever, maybe something seasonal related to that as well. You know, have a mount for 12s instead and Keystone Master or something like that. I don't think they really need to you know, again, reinvent the wheel or do anything crazy here. I think adding a reward for 12s would be pretty big, and it would get to the point where like it would at least encourage people who want to do a little bit higher keys to see what it's like to play without the affixes and with Fort and Tyran and experiment with the new system. And maybe they will be like, oh, okay, maybe I can go a little bit higher to get title or something.
It would be beyond doing portals too, because portals you get at 10s.
Right.
I think that portals also just like aren't that incentivizing.
Yeah, especially when half of them are old dungeons too.
I can go back to
I guess it says, yeah. But
I think people like them. I think I wouldn't underestimate those, especially now that in the War Within they are account wide. So you have them on every character. So whether you're a Mog farmer or you just, you know, are mega FOMO and you need to have everything, I think people actually do appreciate those portals more than you guys might think.
Oh, I mean, I agree with that. Though the one thing that I want to say on that is they never actually updated us on how score is going to work. When they did the whole Affix thing, they were like, oh yeah, we're still figuring out how scores gonna work, and we are a month and a half away from the season launch.
I wouldn't be shocked if it goes back to the old Raider IO system where it's just highest key, but it also could just be like top 2.
I mean, I could see two ways, which is just a single track where Fortified and Tyrannical are now combined, because it doesn't matter for people who are doing lower keys if to have both Tyrannical and Fortified, because it's not as imbalanced. And anything above 10, you're getting both anyways. So like that, like Growl said, depending on how they do the scrolling system, there might not be that middle zone where there's nothing going on. But I totally agree. Just something small like a mount, to kind of match a CE mount from rating would I think go a pretty long way to kind of just push people to go that one step further than just getting their gear.
All right, I'll pitch it. So whatever the KSM mount is, just do like a reskin / like recolor / whatever that themes a little bit more towards the season, and then you get that at 12s. So they don't even really need to like make a new crazy asset or anything. Just like a new more swagged out version of the KSM mount if you do all 12s.
I mean, how are they? But how are they supposed to reuse that for season 2 and season 3 then?
Great question. We'll leave that to Blizzard to figure out.
Or think about it. You know how we had the orange bird for CE?
That was sick.
You know we had the blue bird for the shop. What did they put the blue bird as the Mythic Plus reward? How would that go over with the community, you think?
You should put it in the trading post, honestly.
Oh, the trading post. Oh man, you get more tendies if you get 12s. All right, perfect. That's the solution.
Okay. Next question. I think that this is a great one for you, Squishei. From Sebastian on Twitter, he says, "Hey, I got a question for your next podcast. As I find it kind of unfair that you have to raid for BIS items, how would you guys rate a daily M+ tournament, a short version with like 4 teams, where then you can queue and have a chance on a weekly basis to have a random raid drop? So you can basically get this reward once a week and can participate once per day. Kind of like the tournament system from StarCraft 2.
I don't mind the tournament system. I don't know that it should be tied to gear, though. Like, I think we've seen short-form tournaments occur in multiple other games. I think Fortnite has one. We definitely see, like, Clash in League. I can't really think of any others off the top of my head. I mean, but we've...
Raider.io does some with their Dungeon Dojo series and stuff like that, right?
Yeah. Oh, Call of Duty has it as well. But basically, like a short form official tournament that's just in game. I think probably the most known one is probably Classroom League. I think it'd be pretty cool to add that, but I don't know that it should be tied to gear. I know people don't exactly like, being forced to raid for myth track gear, but I think the two systems are probably misaligned in that. You probably have a pretty angry player base who don't want to do this because they now feel forced to compete, which, people are very nervous and anxious and stressed about, to get this gear, which kind of just shifts the problem to another thing that they may not want to do.
I'm going to shoot this guy down. So here's the thing. Blizzard, so when it comes to raid gear, well, it's important to understand the philosophy, okay? So Blizzard is basically saying they want you to raid. They want this gear to be gated behind raid, and they want to encourage you to be in a guild in Mythic raid, right?
Yes.
The same thing, for example, is the very rare items, right? The purpose of the very rare items is because they want you to raid and kill these bosses and get these items, right? And so they added this bullion system, and I get this question a lot. What if they added bullions every season? Well, the problem is the purpose of these items is to make it so you have to raid. So if you add bullions and you don't have to raid to get them, well then why are there even very rare items in the first place? Like just remove the very rare items, remove the bullions, and then you're chilling, right? And it's the same thing with the myth track. The problem isn't that they don't know how to give you the myth track. They gave us the myth track last expansion. The problem is that Blizzard says we do not want to give you the myth track. So while, we could talk about maybe some sort of like automated tournament system in WoW, the myth track and the item has nothing to do with it, right? Like they don't want you to get myth track items as frequently an M+. Like it's just, that's the design philosophy. Like it doesn't have to do with the means of how you get it. It has to do with they don't want you to get it. So I think the idea of an automated tournament system could be cool. To me, I think a cool system would be there's an NPC outside of each dungeon and there's a leaderboard for like the fastest run or the highest run or something. Maybe it's per server, maybe it's per whatever, like some sort of like little mini Raider IO system in game, and then maybe you have like, your name is there for the next week if you had the highest run, something like that. I think would be more in line with WoW than an automated tournament system. But I do think, having something, to recognize high key runs would be cool, but it doesn't have to do with the Mythic raid or gearing.
I also know it's been criticized by some people that getting myth track gear from Mythic Plus is infinitely easier than raid.
Let's
that is a discussion that I don't want to get into, but like that is also a possibility, which is different than quantity. So like there's a lot of factors here.
Does anybody here really think that that's even true? Like the first bosses of Mythic aren't even like that hard in comparison. Like, dude, I think the first couple bosses of Mythic are about the same level as doing a 10.
Yeah, it's hard because I think the big point of contention is the fact that it's easy and it's convenient to get together a group of 5 people versus 20, yes. And that's why people do Mythic Plus, right?
Sure,
that's the appeal of Mythic Plus. The problem is like if they never incentivize you to put together a group of 20 and like set aside your differences and try and schedule this, then nobody ever will, right? Unless you really, really love raiding. So that's sort of why, right? Is I would say in terms of like which one has the highest skill, like that argument is ridiculous.
I hate that argument. It's so bad.
There's no doubt
people do it all the time.
Get 5. Yeah. Oh yeah, that argument.
Oh, dude, I love it plus is infinitely scaling, so it's automatically got to be harder.
Yeah.
All right, final question from Ghost on Twitter. It says, "Hi, long-time listener, first-time caller here. As a well-known fan of the Twilight series, I was wondering what Growl's favorite film from the series is and why. Personally, I think his favorite would be Eclipse, as that was when the real Team Jacob and Team Edward rivalry catapulted to the forefront of pop culture. Let me know if I'm wrong, but also let me know how I'm not right, because I'm pretty certain about this. Growl, how are you feeling about Team Jacob versus Team Edward?" All right, and that's going to be it for this week's episode of the Bench Podcast. Thank you guys so much for watching episode 2. We will see you guys in next week's episode. Goodbye.
Peace.
Bye.
Perfect.
Good.
That was my answer.
I picked up what you're putting down there.